There is a kind of power that does not manifest itself through brute force or accumulated wealth, but through something much more subtle and permanent, the ability to become inevitable in the minds of others. While most people seek to be loved, one uncomfortable truth remains. Love is volatile, ephemeral, dependent on mood and circumstances. But respect tempered with fear, this is the cement that builds lasting empires. Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine who dared to tear off the mask of political hypocrisy in the 16th century, did not write The Prince to teach tyranny. He wrote a survival manual for a world that devours the naive. A world where unarmed goodness is crushed, where total transparency is a fatal vulnerability, and where those who refuse to understand the rules of the human game are doomed to be pieces moved by other players. You may not like these rules, but ignoring them does not make them disappear. It only guarantees that you will be their victim. Right now, someone is trying to influence you. Maybe it's your boss, manipulating your guilt to extract more work. Maybe it's a colleague, sowing doubts about your capabilities. Maybe it's someone close, using affection as a bargaining chip to get conformity. The question is not whether you are in a power game. The question is, do you know you're playing? And more importantly, do you know how to win? Throughout this journey, we will not romanticize Machiavelli or turn him into a villain. Let's do something more valuable. Let's extract 7 fundamental laws from his thought and translate them into practical tools for the contemporary world. These are not abstract theories. These are principles tested through centuries of human history, validated by the blood of empires that rose and fell. In the end, you won't be the same person. You will have seen the invisible architecture that governs human interactions. And once you see it, you can no longer pretend you don't know. Law 1. Never eclipse those above you. The first law of Machiavellian power is counterintuitive to modern minds obsessed with meritocracy. Make those above you feel superior, always. It doesn't matter how brilliant your idea, how elegant your solution, how superior your competence. If you make your superior feel diminished, you haven't won an ally. You have created an enemy with institutional power to destroy it. The psychology behind this law is brutal in its simplicity. The human ego is not a rational construct. It's an emotional fortress built to protect one's self-image against perceived threats. When you shine too brightly around someone with authority over you, you're not simply showing competence. He is conveying a subliminal and dangerous message. You are not as special as you think. I could do your job better than you. And the ego does not forgive this transgression. He demands retaliation. In ancient Rome, Marcus Licinius Crassus was the richest man of his era. Pompey was the most celebrated general. Julius Caesar was rising as a political star. When these 3 men formed the first triumvirate in 60 BC, it was an alliance of convenience that was supposed to balance Roman power. But Crassus made a fatal mistake. Obsessed with proving that he was not just a wealthy merchant, but a military leader worthy of glory comparable to that of Pompey, he led a disastrous campaign against the Parthian Empire. Not out of strategic necessity, out of vanity, he needed to outshine Pompey in the only domain where Pompey shone, the battlefield. The result? Crassus was captured, humiliated, and, according to legend, had molten gold poured down his throat by the Parthians, a symbolic death for a man whose greed for glory exceeded his wisdom. His attempted eclipse not only destroyed it, but destabilized the Roman balance of power, accelerating the path to civil war. In the contemporary corporate environment, this dynamic manifests itself in more subtle but equally destructive ways. Are you the brilliant analyst who constantly corrects your manager in meetings? Do you document your contributions in a way that implicitly diminishes the work of your supervisor? You're building your own guillotine. The mediocre manager will not be replaced by you. It will be protected by the structure, and you will be labeled as difficult to manage, not a team player, corporate codes to threat to the ego of someone important. The practical arsenal is simple, but requires discipline. First, give credit generously up the hierarchy, even when the idea was predominantly yours. Use language like based on the vision you've shared, or expanding on the framework you've established. Second, allow your superiors to correct you publicly on minor matters. This strategic sacrifice of small battles reinforces hierarchy and calms egos, buying him political capital for the battles that really matter. You're not being servile, you are being strategic. There is a monumental difference between genuine submission and calculated performance of deference. Law 2, cultivate an aura of unpredictability. The second law is about control through uncertainty. Be deliberately unpredictable at strategic moments. Humans are pattern recognition machines. Our brains evolved to predict the behavior of other tribe members because predictability meant safety. When you become completely predictable, you become controllable. Others calibrate their manipulations based on their response patterns. But when you inject calculated unpredictability into your actions, you generate productive anxiety in others. They can't completely map out their intentions, and that uncertainty grants you psychological space. Machiavelli noted that Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, maintained his power not only through force, but through the impossibility of his enemies anticipating his movements. Borgia could be generous and cruel, diplomatic and brutal, trustworthy and traitorous, all depending on what the moment demanded. This moral flexibility, which scandalized the moralists, was precisely their greatest strategic weapon. His opponents never knew which Borgia would appear, so they remained in a state of heightened vigilance, expending mental energy trying to decipher it instead of acting against it. Consider Borgia's conquest of the Romagna in 1502. The region was fragmented between petty tyrants who oppressed the people. Borgia conquered the area quickly, but he knew he needed to pacify it without tarnishing his own reputation. He appointed Ramiro de Orco, a man known for his cruelty, as governor. De Orco restored order through brutal methods, just as Borgia intended. But then, when order was established, Borgia did something unexpected. He publicly executed de Orco in Cesana's main square, his body cut in half and displayed. The message was manifold. Brutality would no longer be tolerated. Borgia protected the people, and most importantly, Borgia was impossible to predict. The one that seemed to be his right arm was sacrificed in an instant. Who could feel safe conspiring against a man capable of this? In the contemporary context, unpredictability does not mean chaos or inconsistency that destroys trust. It means never being fully legible. In the business world, it is the executive who occasionally rejects a seemingly lucrative proposal for reasons he does not fully explain, creating uncertainty about his actual decision criteria. It is the negotiator who sometimes accepts unfavorable terms and other times battles fiercely for minor details, making it impossible for the other side to establish a standard of concessions. In interpersonal relationships, it is the person who is not always emotionally available at the same intensity, who occasionally withdraws without warning, who defies the other's attempt to categorize him completely. Practical application requires subtlety. First, vary your communication patterns. If you always respond to messages immediately, occasionally it takes hours without explanation. If you always answer calls, occasionally let it go to voicemail. Create gaps in predictability that others fill with speculation. Second, occasionally make decisions that seem to contradict your obvious interests or previous patterns. If you always prioritize profit, occasionally reject money on principle that you don't fully articulate. This apparent inconsistency is actually a superior consistency. You're consistently refusing to be mapped. Law 3. Turn enemies into tools. The third law defies our tribal intuition. Your enemies are more useful than your friends. Friends are already convinced. They don't have to be earned. But a converted enemy becomes the most powerful propaganda of his ability. and an enemy kept close but powerless becomes a detector of other threats and a living demonstration of the cost of opposing you. Psychology here touches something profound about credibility and conversion. When an ally praises you, everyone takes a bias. But when someone known to oppose you publicly recognizes your value, that recognition has multiplied weight. It is the testimony of the convert, and there is no more powerful testimony. Plus, your enemies are obsessed with you in ways that friends aren't. They study their weaknesses, map their vulnerabilities, anticipate their movements. This intelligence, if you can access it without destroying them completely, is invaluable. Abraham Lincoln faced a crucial decision when he was elected president in 1860. The nation was fragmenting, civil war was imminent, and he needed an extraordinarily competent cabinet. But the most competent men in the Republican Party were his rivals, some who openly despised him. William Seward had ridiculed Lincoln as an unsophisticated provincial lawyer. Salmon Chase believed he would be a superior president. Edwin Stanton had humiliated Lincoln years earlier by calling him the guerrilla of Illinois. The conventional response would be to exile these men, rewarding mediocre loyalists. Lincoln did the opposite. He appointed all of them to critical positions. Seward became Secretary of State, Chase, Secretary of the Treasury, Stanton, Secretary of War. This team of rivals, as historian Doris Kearns Goodwin called it, was initially skeptical and resentful, but Lincoln had understood something fundamental. These men were too competent to ignore, and their rivalries with him could be turned into loyalty through demonstrated trust and strategic inclusion. Gradually, each of these former enemies became not only an ally, but a loyal defender. Stanton, who had mocked Lincoln, wept over his body, saying, "Now it belongs to the ages." The transformation was complete. In the modern corporate environment, this law manifests itself in the art of integrating dissidents. Do you have a colleague who constantly questions your proposals in meetings? Instead of isolating him, you invite him for an individual coffee. You acknowledge their concerns, ask for their perspective genuinely, and, if possible, incorporate elements of their criticisms into your next proposal, crediting them publicly. You've just turned a critic into a stakeholder. Now he has an investment in the success of the idea because his fingerprint is on it. And when he makes this case to others, his conversion from skeptic to defender is noticed and carries credibility that the support of a natural ally would never have. The practical arsenal here has two dimensions. First, identify what your enemies really want. It is rarely its destruction in and of itself. It's usually recognition, influence, or validation that they feel you possess, and they don't. If you can feed that need without compromising your fundamental position, you neutralize hostility. Second, keep some enemies visible and vocal, but controlled. They serve as lightning rods that attract criticism that would otherwise be scattered. Better to have one known source of opposition that you monitor than multiple hidden sources that conspire in the shadows. Law 4. Hide your intentions. The fourth law is about informational warfare. Never fully reveal what you really want. When your intentions are transparent, you arm your opponents with the exact map of how to thwart you. When your motivations are opaque, others spend resources trying to decipher them, resources that are not being used against you. And when you occasionally reveal a false intention, you can manipulate others into moving exactly where you want them. Machiavelli emphasized that appearance and reality must be carefully managed. A prince should appear pious, trustworthy, humane, upright, and religious, but he should be prepared to act in the opposite way when necessary. The fatal mistake is to really be these things inflexibly, because political reality often demands violation of these virtues. But the equally fatal mistake is to appear not to possess them, because moral judgment of the masses is based on appearances. The Machiavellian solution is not pure cynicism, but strategic sophistication. Control the narrative about your intentions while maintaining complete operational flexibility. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor who unified Germany in the 19th century, was a master of this art. When he sought to provoke war with Austria in 1866, he did not declare his intentions. Instead, he proposed an alliance with Austria against Denmark, conquered together, and then created a deliberately insoluble administrative dispute over how to administer the conquered territories. He built the trap and let Austria walk into it, believing that they were defending their legitimate interests. When war came, Prussia seemed to be responding to Austrian aggression by not initiating conquest. Bismarck had concealed his real intention, German unification under Prussian hegemony, behind a smokescreen of administrative disputes and calculated provocations. Austria fought a war whose true terms she did not understand until it was too late. In the contemporary world, this law is constantly violated by people who believe that radical honesty is a universal virtue. They advertise their career ambitions to colleagues who are competing for the same promotions. They share their relational insecurities with partners who can use them as leverage. They state their business strategies for markets full of competitors. This is not honesty. It is unilateral disarmament on a battlefield that remains armed. Practical application requires discipline in communication. First, cultivate multiple plausible explanations for your actions. If you're building a specific skill, don't say it's because you want a career change. Say it's intellectual curiosity. Say it's personal development. Let others guess your real motivation as you progress toward it. Second, occasionally state a false intent and then visibly abandon it. You train observers to distrust your statements of intent, which paradoxically protects your real intentions when you occasionally need to communicate them in a veiled way. Third, use proxies. Don't pursue your goal directly. Pursue adjacent goals that naturally lead to your real goal, but which appear to be the end in themselves. Tipping point, transition, and hook. We lay the foundation. You have learned that shining too much around those with power over you is political suicide. You have understood that predictability is vulnerability, and that calculated unpredictability is psychological armor. You've seen that enemies can be more valuable tools than friends when handled correctly. And you understood that total transparency of intentions is giving the treasure map to your rivals. But these are defenses. They are walls that you build around yourself. These are ways not to lose. But true power is not simply not losing. It is actively shaping the reality around you. It is to get others to act in their best interests while believing they are acting in accordance with theirs. It's building structures where you win, regardless of which pieces are moved. The next 3 laws are not for those who simply want to survive in the dynamics of power. They are for those who want to master them. They are not defensive tactics. They are weapons of construction and destruction. Use them accurately, because once you begin to actively reshape the perception and behavior of others, you cannot feign innocence. You will have crossed from observer of the game to conscious player, and there is no return from this crossing. Law 5. Master the art of strategic absence. The 5th law inverts the logic of constant presence. Value grows with scarcity, and power multiplies with strategic absence. Excessive presence breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds disrespect, and disrespect erodes influence. When you're always available, always present, always responsive, you become part of the landscape, human furniture. But when you strategically withdraw, when you create voids that your absence leaves, you force others to confront how much they depend on you, and dependence is the silent cousin of power. The psychology behind this law is rooted in basic economic principles applied to social capital. Scarcity increases perceived value. not because the item or person is objectively more valuable, but because our brains use availability as a heuristic for importance. What is rare must be important, or it would not be rare. The executive who answers emails at 3 in the morning does not signal dedication. It signals that his time has no alternative value, that he has nothing more important to do. The friend who always cancels other plans for you doesn't signal loyalty. It signals that you are your only option. Paradoxically, total availability communicates a lack of value. Charles de Gaulle, the French general who became president of France, built his political authority almost entirely through strategic absence. During World War II, while leader of the Free French in exile, he was repeatedly marginalized by the Allies, particularly by Roosevelt and Churchill, who found him difficult and pretentious. De Gaulle responded not with entreaties or concessions, but with calculated retreat. When the Allies planned the invasion of North Africa, without consulting him, he refused support and cooperation, forcing them to recognize that they could not legitimize operations on French territory without the symbol he had become. When he was excluded from important decisions, he dramatically threatened to resign, creating political crises that forced the Allies to re-engage him on more favorable terms. Their absence created vacuums that others could not fill, and each return was a demonstration that, as annoying as it was, he was needed. After the war, he used the same tactic domestically, resigning when he didn't get what he wanted, only to be recalled when France descended into chaos. His last retreat in 1946 was followed by 12 years in the political wilderness. But when France entered a constitutional crisis with the Algerian War, it was de Gaulle that the nation called in. He had turned absence into indispensability. In the modern professional environment, constant presence is often confused with commitment. The employee who works a visible 60 hours a week is valued less than the one who achieves superior results in 30 hours and seems to have life beyond work. Why? Because the second is signaling efficiency, selectivity, and the alternative value of time. He has options. In interpersonal relationships, the person who is always emotionally available at the same intensity becomes too secure. There is no challenge. There is no mystery. There is no need to conquer or maintain. Attachment anxiety, which paradoxically intensifies attraction, requires some uncertainty about availability. The practical arsenal here is delicate and requires careful calibration. First, establish irregular availability periodicity. If you always respond immediately, you've trained others to expect it. But if sometimes you respond in minutes and other times in days, without a clear pattern, you have created productive uncertainty. They don't know if you're busy with something more important or simply choosing not to prioritize communication at that time. Both interpretations elevate his status. Second, when you withdraw, don't explain it completely. Over-explanation signals that you feel you must justify your absence, which implies subordination. A withdrawal followed by unelaborated return communicates autonomy. Third, make sure that your absence has noticeable consequences. If you disappear and nothing changes, you have proven your irrelevance. But if projects slow down, decisions hang out, or group dynamics change noticeably when you're not present, you've demonstrated value through emptiness. Law 6. Control perceived options. The sixth law is about choice. Architecture. Real power is not about making people choose what you want. It is to structure the available options in such a way that all choices serve your interests. When you force someone into a single option, you create resistance and resentment. But when you offer multiple options, all carefully constructed to lead to your desired goal via different routes, you create the illusion of autonomy while maintaining total control over the outcome. This law explores something fundamental about human autonomy. We viscerally resist direct coercion because it threatens our self-image as free agents. But when we are given choice, Even among limited options, we experience the decision as our own. We take psychological ownership of the outcome because we decide. This illusion of agency is so powerful that we often prefer a limited choice over no choice at all, even when all the available options are suboptimal. The sophisticated manipulator does not remove choice. He prunes the garden of possibilities so that all roads lead to his preferred destination. During the Italian Renaissance, Cosimo de' Medici consolidated control over Florence without ever assuming a formal title of power. The Florentine Republic had complex institutions supposedly designed to prevent tyranny, multiple chambers, frequent elections, rotation of offices. Cosimo did not destroy these institutions. He infiltrated and manipulated them. He controlled who was appointed to key positions, ensuring that all seemingly opposing factions were actually filled with his debtors, allies, or economic dependents. When elections took place, citizens had a genuine choice between multiple candidates, but all viable candidates owed their positions or fortunes to the Medici network. Cosimo allowed rival factions to exist and even clash publicly, but he controlled the spectrum of possibilities. No anti-Medici faction could gain real traction because the resources needed for political competition, patronage, funding, access, were all channeled through systems that Cosimo controlled. Florentines believed that they lived in a republic. Technically, they lived. But it was a republic where all significant choices had already been structured to preserve Medici hegemony. In the contemporary corporate world, this tactic is constantly manifested. The skilled manager doesn't tell the team which solution to implement. He presents 3 options at the meeting, having already privately eliminated all alternatives that do not serve his vision. The team debates, votes, chooses one of the 3. They feel ownership over the decision. But all 3 options were acceptable to the manager, differing only in implementation details, not in strategic direction. The experienced negotiator does not make a final offer. It features Package A, which is expensive but comprehensive, and Package B, which is cheaper but with clear limitations. The client chooses B feeling that he got a bargain, not realizing that B was the negotiator's goal from the start, and A existed only to make B seem reasonable by contrast. Practical application requires inverted thinking. Start with your goal, then work backwards to identify multiple paths that lead to it. Present these paths as genuine options, highlighting real trade-offs between them to increase the credibility of the choice. Allow vigorous debate between the options. The more energetically people defend their preferred choice among their carefully constructed options, the more psychological investment they have in the end result. Second, when possible, eliminate options that don't serve you before they're publicly considered. Use objective criteria or resource limitations to remove alternatives from the table before the official discussion begins. And third, occasionally allow an option you don't prefer to win, especially in matters of low importance. This maintains the credibility of the process of choosing for the decisions that really matter. Law 7. Cultivate dependency through exclusive knowledge. The 7th and most sophisticated law is about monopoly expertise. Become the only source of something others need. Not money, not strength, but knowledge, skill, or access that cannot be easily replicated. When you own something that others can get from multiple sources, you are replaceable. When you possess something that exists only in you, you become necessary. And necessity is the most durable form of power because it survives changes in affection, loyalty, or circumstance. Machiavelli observed that mercenaries are always dangerous because their loyalty is transactional and temporary. But an advisor who possesses unique knowledge of the internal operations of the state, of the weaknesses of enemies, of the secrets of alliances, such an advisor cannot be easily dismissed without enormous risk. It has become a repository of critical institutional information. His value is not in what he does, but in what he knows. And knowledge, unlike physical labor, cannot be easily transferred or replicated without the cooperation of the possessor. Henry Kissinger built a 50-year career in power not through formal office, but through exclusive knowledge and access. As Secretary of State and National Security Advisor under Nixon and Ford, Kissinger cultivated direct relationships with world leaders that bypassed normal diplomatic channels. He was often the only person in Washington who had recently spoken with China's Zhou Enlai, the Soviet Union's Leonid Brezhnev, and key leaders in the Middle East. He deliberately did not fully document his conversations, keeping critical details in his own memory. When crises emerged, it was Kissinger who could say, "When I spoke to Brezhnev last week, he signaled that." No one else had that knowledge. No one else had those relationships. Even after he left office, presidents continued to consult him because he maintained information networks that took decades to build and that could not be instantly transferred to successors. It had become infrastructure, and infrastructure is not easily replaced. In the modern professional environment, this law manifests itself in the difference between easily replaceable workers and indispensable specialists. The developer who uses only common frameworks can be replaced. The developer who built the critical legacy system and is the only person who fully understands its peculiarities is indispensable. This is not accidental. It's strategy. Not through sabotage or deliberately making systems obscure, but through accumulating depth of knowledge in specific domains that others have not prioritized. In the realm of interpersonal relationships, knowledge-based dependence manifests as being the person who understands the full emotional context of situations. You are the one others consult not only for advice, but for interpretation. You see patterns that others don't. You connect dots that remain isolated to others. This is not necessarily superior intelligence. It is directed attention and institutional memory. You remember the nuances that others have forgotten. You understand the story that contextualizes the present. And that understanding makes you valuable. The practical arsenal here requires long-term vision and consistent investment. First, identify knowledge domains that are critical to your organization or social network, but that are neglected or undervalued by others. Don't choose what is already saturated with experts. Choose what is important but tedious, technical but essential, complex but unavoidable. Become the expert in what no one else wants to master, but that everyone will eventually need. Second, document selectively. Share enough knowledge to demonstrate value and build trust, but keep the deeper layers of understanding, the context insights, the nuances that can only be acquired through prolonged experience as your own. You're not maliciously hiding information. You are recognizing that truly profound knowledge cannot be conveyed through documents in any form. It requires mentoring, conversation, years of immersion. Third, constantly update your unique knowledge. What is exclusive today will be common tomorrow. The only way to maintain a monopoly of expertise is to always be one step ahead, always learning the next layer before others catch up. But there is a vital paradox in this law that must be navigated carefully. If you become too indispensable, you can become irreplaceable in a way that blocks your upward mobility. You are too valuable in your current position to be promoted to another. The solution is to create dependency in a way that is beneficial, but not absolute. You want to be the most valuable person in your role, but not so unique that the organization panics at the thought of your leaving. Cultivate one or two potential substitutes, but always maintain a margin of advantage. You are the generous mentor who lifts others up, but who still stays one step ahead. This delicate dance between indispensability and mobility is where masters of this law operate. We traverse dangerous territory together. You now have a map of the 7 fundamental laws that have governed human power dynamics since civilizations began to form. Never eclipse those with authority over you, because wounded egos are more dangerous than direct competitors. Cultivate strategic unpredictability, because total predictability is an invitation to manipulation. Turn enemies into tools, because conversions have more power than natural alliances. Hide your true intentions, because transparency arms your opponents with the map of how to thwart you. Dominate strategic absence, because constant presence destroys perceived value. Control the options available, because real power is not about forcing choices, but structuring possibilities. And cultivate unique knowledge, because dependency based on expertise survives changes in all other forms of loyalty. But knowledge without wisdom is dynamite in the hands of a child. And here is the wisdom that Machiavelli offers, but that superficial readers constantly miss. These laws are not moral commandments. They are descriptions of how power actually works, not how we would like it to work. You can decide not to use them. That is his prerogative. But your refusal will not make them disappear. It only ensures that you will remain ignorant of the forces that shape your social interactions, while others, less scrupulous or simply more realistic, will apply them against you. Machiavelli wrote The Prince not as a manual of tyranny, but as a survival guide to a brutal world. He had seen republics destroyed by naive idealism and tyrants overthrown by stupid cruelty. He understood that power without principles is monstrosity, but principles without power are impotence. The Machiavellian synthesis is not an abandonment of morality, but its subordination to efficacy. Be good when kindness works. Be severe when severity is needed. But above all, be effective. Because in the end, it is results, not intentions, that determine whether your legacy is one of construction or destruction. There is a test of whether you have truly understood these laws. If you read them and felt pure excitement, as if you had discovered cheat codes for life, you understood them superficially. These are not gimmicks. These are serious responsibilities. If you read them and felt complete moral revulsion, rejecting them as a textbook of sociopathy, you didn't understand it either. These are not moral choices. They are descriptions of dynamics that exist independently of their approval. But if you have read them and felt weight, recognizing that you can no longer feign innocence about how power works, that you have a responsibility to decide how and when to apply these principles, then you are beginning to understand. The temptation, after absorbing knowledge like this, is to divide the world into two camps: the conscious manipulators and the unconscious victims, the players and the pieces. This is a dangerous simplification. The reality is more complex. Every human being oscillates between these states depending on the context. You are a player in some domains and ask in others. You manipulate in some interactions and are manipulated in others. The point is not to eliminate a category entirely. It is gradually increasing the proportion of time that you act consciously rather than being acted upon unconsciously. There is also the question of how these laws interact with genuine ethics. Is it possible to be strategically sophisticated and morally serious at the same time? Machiavelli would argue that it is not only possible, but necessary. A strategist without a moral compass becomes a monster, but a moralist without strategic competence becomes a martyr. And martyrs, however admirable in retrospect, often failed to protect those who depended on them. If you have people who depend on you, family, team, community, then strategic effectiveness is not an optional luxury. It is a moral obligation. You must be sophisticated enough to protect them in a world that doesn't share your values. Consider how you will enforce these laws. Is it with awareness of its implications, or with the appropriate rationalization of what ends justify any means? The difference is not in using the laws or not. It lies in recognizing the moral weight of doing so. When you hide your intentions, you are being strategic, yes, but you are also denying others full information to make your own choices. When you cultivate dependency, you are building value, Yes. But you're also creating a symmetry of power that can be abused. The mature Machiavellian holds both truths simultaneously. He acts strategically while recognizing the ethical costs of these actions. He does not hide behind facile cynicism that says, "This is the game," or performative moralism that denies the efficacy of his tactics. There is one last dimension of these laws that we need to confront: their destructive potential when misapplied. Each of these laws, taken to the extreme or applied without calibration, transforms itself from a tool into a pathology. Never to eclipse superiors becomes pathological subservience that destroys self-esteem. Unpredictability becomes chaos that destroys trust. Turning enemies into tools becomes cynical manipulation that sees humans only as resources. Concealing intentions becomes compulsive dishonesty that destroys intimacy. Strategic absence becomes emotional abandonment. Controlling options becomes elimination of autonomy. Exclusive knowledge becomes a parasitic accumulation that blocks collective progress. The line between skillful application and pathological distortion is subtle. It requires constant self-reflection and feedback from people whose perspective you trust. So, what will you do with this knowledge? You have three options. The first is to forget. Close this page, return to your life, and act as if these principles do not exist. Millions choose this option. They prefer the comfort of innocence to the weight of conscience. It is a valid choice, but irreversible only in one direction. Once you see the architecture of power, you can't unsee it. You can just pretend not to see, which is the most exhausting form of blindness. The second option is to apply these laws without discrimination. Become Machiavellian in every interaction, always calculating, always maneuvering, always treating every conversation as a strategic battlefield. This path leads to loneliness. You can accumulate power, influence, victories, but you will lose genuine connection. Because real intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is incompatible with constant manipulation. You'll win the game, but at the cost of forgetting why you were playing. The third option is synthesis. Deeply understand these laws, but apply them selectively. Reserve your sharpest strategic tools for contexts where they are really needed: adversarial environments, high-stakes negotiations, protection from genuine manipulators, while maintaining spaces in your life where you can let your guard down. This is the most difficult option because it requires constant discernment. When does this relationship require strategy, and when does it require authenticity? When does this situation require maneuver, and when does it require direct honesty? There is no formula, just refined judgment through trial and error. Machiavelli was not a monster. He was a gifted observer of monsters and of saints, and of most of us who oscillate between these extremes. He has seen how republics fall and tyrants rise. He witnessed the gap between how people say the world works and how it actually works. And he had the courage to write what he saw, knowing that it would be misinterpreted, demonized, used by people who would justify atrocities by invoking his name. But he wrote anyway because he believed that knowledge, even dangerous knowledge, is preferable to ignorance. You now carry that same knowledge. He is present and burdened simultaneously. You will see these laws operating around you constantly, in the boss who strategically leaves before difficult decisions to force the team to solve problems without him, increasing his dependency. In the colleague who never fully reveals his career intentions, keeping you always a little uncertain about whether he is an ally or a competitor. The person in your social circle who occasionally disappears without explanation, only to return and find that they were more valued in your absence. In the political, it offers two options that are fundamentally similar, but appear to be opposite choices. You will see the array, and you will not be able to unsee it. The question is not whether you will use these laws. On some level, you already use them. Every human being with minimal social intelligence applies instinctive versions of these principles. The question is whether you will apply them consciously or unconsciously, skillfully or clumsily, ethically or amorally, in the service of worthwhile goals or in the service of ego and greed. These are choices that only you can make, but they are choices you can't avoid making. Inaction is just another form of action with different consequences. Machiavelli ended The Prince with dedication to Lorenzo de' Medici, begging for the opportunity to serve and apply his knowledge. It was a desperate request from an exiled man trying to return to power. Lorenzo never responded. Machiavelli died relatively poor and forgotten, his treatise considered scandalous for centuries. But his ideas survived, not because they were morally upbuilding, but because they were true. And true, as uncomfortable as it is, it has specific weight that eventually makes it emerge through layers of denial and moralization. You are at the end of this journey, but if you have truly absorbed what has been presented here, you know that there is no end. There's just the next level of sophistication. Because these 7 laws are foundation, not the complete edifice. There are levels of subtlety, layers of application, dimensions of integration that take decades to master. True masters of these arts do not seem to be using tactics. They are so integrated with principles that their actions seem natural, spontaneous, even innocent. But beneath the surface, there is sophisticated architecture constantly operating. The final paradox is this: if you apply these laws perfectly, no one will know that you are applying them. You will appear to be merely an intelligent, charismatic, effective person. Your manipulations will be invisible because they will appear to be just good communication. Your dependency building will appear to be just generously shared expertise. Your control of options will seem to be just leadership that offers clarity in complex situations. And this is the supreme test. If your tactics are obvious, you're an amateur. If your tactics are invisible but effective, you are getting closer to mastery. But don't confuse tactical invisibility with impact invisibility. The consequences of their actions must be visible. The results you achieve, the problems you solve, the value you create, these should be obvious to everyone. What must remain hidden are the precise mechanisms through which you reach them. Let others attribute your success to talent, luck, natural charisma. Let them believe that you are simply blessed. Because the moment they understand that it is method and not magic, they can replicate their methods, and replication destroys advantage. These are the 7 Machiavellian laws for becoming feared, respected, and impossible to manipulate. They are not shortcuts. These are principles that require constant practice, refinement through experience, and integration into their character until they become second nature. You will stumble. You will misapply. You will overdo it in some situations and underapply it in others. This is expected. Mastery in any complex domain comes through thousands of small mistakes that are gradually corrected over time. But now you have the map. You understand the territory, and understanding is the first step to power. What you will build with this power is your choice and your responsibility. Choose wisely, because in the end, power is an amplifier. He doesn't create character. He reveals and magnifies the character that already exists. If you are fundamentally destructive, power will make you monster more effective. But if you're fundamentally constructive, power will make you builder more effective. The tool is neutral. The use never is. Go now and apply what you have learned. But go with your eyes open to the weight of what you carry. You can no longer claim innocence. You've seen how the game is actually played. And once you see it, you have a responsibility to play well, or to consciously choose not to play in certain contexts. But ignorance is no longer an option available to you. And perhaps this is the true transformation that this knowledge offers. Not power over others, but an end to the illusion that you were not always in a power game. You were. You always have been. Now you simply know the rules.